Hi, this is Jack Stanley, and I wanted to talk about export pre-dog records made by Eldridge Johnson. You don't see them very often. They're kind of unusual. You got to remember, in the earliest days of what would become the Victor Talking Machine Company, the first 2 years were quite slow, and sales were not that brisk. But one of the interesting things is that in that first year of the 10-inch record, which started in the beginnings of 1901, experiments were done in 1900 to get it all set up, um, there were a number of records that were sold all over the country, and they had different labels, of course. The first one had the 10-inch record label, which is exceedingly rare. In fact, you don't see them at all except for in a rare collection here or there. But one other thing that's kind of unusual in these records is the export record. Now, we don't think of the pre-dog record being exported, but of course it was. There were a number of issues that traveled around the world, but of course in limited, very limited numbers. Now, one of the things I wanted to mention here is that in the early days of recording, let's say with the cylinder, there were exports, and the Berliner disc, there were exports. And of course, in this pre-dog business, there were exports. So I wanted to show one to you. This is a pre-dog export. Now, of course, it is just a regular domestic issue. But it has one feature that's a slight bit different. Not a great big feature, but an important one. Another thing to mention very quickly is that there were some pre-dog records being made in Europe, I believe in Germany. And they had a slightly different label, and the point printing was different. But these were not printed in Europe. These were pressed and labeled in the United States and then shipped out. And they would have the following thing on the back of the record. Very simply saying, made in the USA. Now, where did I find these records? It's interesting. I found them in Wellington, New Zealand. About 14 years ago. No, 12 years ago, excuse me. And I brought them back with me. I found them so fascinating. But you don't usually see this type of record because there again, they didn't make a large amount of the pre-dogs. And usually we see domestic pre-dogs. Very rarely do you see exported pre-dogs. So they made them, they were exported, they did travel, and some of them traveled very, very far.